Welcome to the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you level up your instruction in order to craft authentic learning experiences for both you and your students. I'm your host, Lee Tucker, a high school English teacher and ed tech enthusiast, and I want to join you on your journey to becoming the best instructor that you possibly can. So if you're ready, grab your adventuring gear and let's get going. Hey, what's up, 8-Bit crew? Today is Thursday, March 25th, and you're listening to episode 33 of the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast. It is getting close to the end of March, folks. We are working our way halfway through the semester, maybe even a little bit more than halfway at this point for most of you. Things are, starting to look up a little bit more. I'm seeing a lot online about teachers being able to get COVID vaccines and all of that. I know I've got my first one a couple of weeks ago, and next Wednesday I'll be getting my second one. So I'm kind of mentally preparing for that, that kickback that the second one's supposed to give out. But it is good to see that things are moving forward and we are working our way out of this tunnel and we are starting to see the light coming toward us. So hopefully things are going well where you are. I've got a really great show for you today. Later on in this week's Boss Battle, I've got authors Cooney Horvath and David Bott, not just authors, but researchers, scientists, doing a lot of really great stuff with education research. And they came on today in this week's episode to talk a little bit about their new book, 10 Things Schools Get Wrong and How We Can Get Them Right. And we spent a good bit of time talking a little education philosophy about the overarching narrative that has become a part of the educational system and a little bit of how we can work to change that narrative so that we are, working towards something that everybody can believe in. So definitely make sure that you check that out a little bit later. First, though, I'm going to share some news and updates that are going on around the education world. First of all, IXL just released a new little fun kind of thing in their platform, and that is leaderboards. So essentially you can create a little bit of friendly competition among your students with these leaderboards to kind of push them towards doing a little bit more than they might do on their own. So if you have IXL, all you got to do is go to the Learning tab, click on the award link, and then click on the leaderboard link, and you can create a new leaderboard. And this is something that you can do sporadically, so you can do it like weekly or monthly or whatever, and you can set it to rank students based on either the number of questions that they answer, the number of questions they answer correctly. You can do leaders by time spent, number of skills that they're proficient in, or number of skills mastered in that time period. And then you can set the subject and the grade levels so that, I don't get my 10th graders doing third grade skills and bumping those numbers way up. And then you can start set a start and end date. So it's a nice little way to put a little bit of that friendly competition in class. And also, if you are familiar and into some of the gamification stuff, this allows all of your students to have a chance of success. So rather than saying until the end of the year where, probably within the first week or two, it starts to become clear who's going to kind of run away with it. You could do something weekly so that even if a student doesn't do great this week, then next week you give them another chance. And then being able to change the different parameters. It might be more about time spent than questions right, or the skills that they're proficient in than how many questions they answered. So it adds a little bit of variety there that is definitely something worth checking out. Google is continuing to, all their releases and updates. They weekly are throwing a lot of stuff out there. So one new thing that I have just seen, I tried this out, is that Chrome will now caption audio and video. So, you don't have to worry about a YouTube video having closed caption options now. You can get it directly from your Chrome browser. So if you go to your settings page, you can click on the 3-dot menu and click settings, or you can just hit Control or Command comma and it will open up the settings. And then you'll click on advanced on the left hand side, click on accessibility, and then you'll see a little toggle switch that says live captioning. And essentially what this does is if you're watching a video or listening to some audio in your Chrome browser, then the captions will show up in a little box at the bottom of the browser. So that's really cool, really great accessibility feature, and students will have access to that too. So if you are working in class and they're trying to listen to something and it's a little bit noisy or anything like that, they can turn those captions on in the Chrome settings to have that readily available. Google is also working on helping to consolidate a lot of the notification stuff in Google Drive on mobile. So now, as the update rolls out, you'll be able to see kind of all your important notifications in Google Drive on your mobile devices. So you'll get to see all those notifications in one place. You'll be able to filter the types of notifications that you get. You can delete or dismiss notifications that you don't want. You can even take action like sharing files directly from that notification. And you can even show more file information directly from that notification as well. So that notification menu will have several features so that you're not having to maybe comb through your drive to find files and all that kind of stuff. And the way this will work is when you've got Drive open on your mobile device, you're going to go to the priority tab, and then at the top you'll see a notification thing. So you can take a look at that and have all of those notifications just right there at your fingertips. Another new Google Chat feature that's coming out is kind of a neat little thing where it's going to sync up and kind of suggest chat recommendations based on your Google Calendar. So basically what it's going to be is if you've got meetings set in your calendar with other people confirmed in that meeting, the chat section in Gmail 10 minutes before and 10 minutes after that scheduled meeting is going to have a little suggested conversation shortcut that will be bumped up to the top of your chat. So you'll see that kind of appear. And basically it's just an easy way to improve that right before, right after communication stuff in a meeting. So if you are going to be a couple minutes late, you can just click on that real quick and shoot a message. Or after the meeting's over, you can send a quick little follow-up message if you needed something. So that's a cool little feature that is coming out as well. Also, you may have noticed that Google Slides in presentation mode has changed a little bit. So they have rolled out some improvements to that presentation toolbar that shows up on the slides. I know if you have seen the old one, it kind of spans across the entire bottom of the Google Slides. So if you end up moving the mouse around, it pops up and it obstructs things. And I know the issue that I always had is if I had something that was linked on a slide, if it was at the bottom of the slide, when I would try to click on it, that little toolbar would pop up and I wouldn't be able to click on it. So essentially what they've done is they made a less intrusive toolbar. It's a lot shorter and it's just kind of in the bottom left corner. I noticed this a few days ago when I was doing some stuff in slides. And basically the new toolbar, it's only got a couple of things on it. You'll have the previous or next slide arrows like normal, and then you'll have the slide picker where you can click and it will show all the slides and you can click on one to go directly to it. And then there's now a little 3-dot menu for everything else. So if you have to do anything more, it will be in that 3-dot menu. So that's really cool. It's really helpful in the sense of being able to see a lot more on those slides while you are in presentation mode. Google Meet is expanding the number of video feeds that you'll be able to see. So if you're on a phone, you'll be able to see up to 8 video feeds on a phone. And then select iPads will be able to see 48 different video feeds. So that's, 48 people on a screen. That sounds like a lot, but, if you need it, you need it, and have fun with that. And finally, Jamboard is rolling out version history. So if you're familiar with version history and things like docs and slides and all that, you can now see that in Jamboard. So you'll be able to see all the different version histories. You can create named versions of each of those, and you can even restore previous versions. So it's useful, especially if you're doing stuff in class where you might need to reset a Jamboard or something like that. Now, if they could just roll out a feature where I could see which students are adding what pictures and information and all that, that would be super helpful. So that will pretty much take care of news and updates in education and education technology. So next up, we're going to open up the treasure chest and see what golden nugget we have today. Today's treasure chest contains another quote. This one comes from Lao Tzu. You might know him as the guy who wrote The Art of War. And the quote that I have today says that failure is the foundation of success and the means by which it is achieved. And, we've talked a lot about failure and learning from failure and growth mindset. That's become a really big thing in schools. But the reason I picked this was a couple of things that really stood out to me. One is this word foundation, and then also means. And so the idea is not just that failure is a good thing and it's acceptable. It's the idea that it becomes the foundation of our learning. In other words, when we recognize that we have messed something up, now all of a sudden we are building a new structure of our understanding on that foundation. So we take that failure, that becomes the groundwork for these new things that we are learning. And, it becomes that, like the quote says, the means or the vessel through which we end up learning. And so I thought that was a really thoughtful kind of idea that I wanted to share. And it goes along a lot if, one of my guests today, Cooney Horvath, wrote another book called Stop Talking, Start Influencing. And one of the chapters in that book talks about the idea of failure and recognizing it and then paying attention to it. So I thought it was kind of appropriate for what we are talking about today. Cooney Horvath is a neuroscientist, educator, best-selling author, and expert in the field of science of learning. He has conducted research and lectured at Harvard University, Harvard Medical School, the University of Melbourne, and over 250 schools internationally. He currently serves as the director of LME Global, a team dedicated to bringing the latest brain and behavioral research to teachers, students, and parents alike. David Bott is the Associate Director of the Institute of Positive Education. David is a sought-out speaker and education consultant who works with government organizations and some of the world's leading schools to help guide well-being, vision, and strategy. David sits on the Dubai Future Council for Education, is a director of the Positive Education Schools Association Board, and has published in academic journals and industry periodicals. He and Jerry collaborated recently on a new book called 10 Things Schools Get Wrong and How We Can Get Them Right, which was published back in 2020. And I picked it up as soon as I saw it because I had read Jared's previous book, and I was blown away with the things that they talked about in this book. And so recently I got to sit down with Jared and David and talk a little bit about the book, but we talked about kind of the final Untitled Chapter, which talks about the purpose of education and the narrative that is a part of education. And it was a really great conversation. I had a blast talking to both of them about this and just kind of the philosophy behind education. So that's coming up next. You definitely don't want to miss my conversation with Jared Cooney Horvath and David Bott on this week's Boss Battle. All right. Well, Jared, David, I really appreciate you coming on today to talk a little bit about the book, school, some education, a little bit of philosophy today. So it's good to have both of y'all on today.
No, thank you for having us. We're always love to chat with you. So this will be good to round 2 for us.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lynn. Great to meet you.
So, David, since this is the first time talking to you, and last time Jared was on, we talked a little about his education journey and kind of the story behind that. So, I'd like to kind of hear a little bit about yours. So, what's kind of your path into education, your journey through a lot of to where you are now?
Yeah. Thanks, Lee, and thanks for the opportunity to be on the podcast today with you guys. My journey really began, I think, when I was a teenager. My mum has been an educator her whole life, English teacher like yourself, Lee, career English teacher, passionate PhD in education. And when I was a teenager, I saw my mum getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to mark English essays and being stressed all the time and not having any time to herself and just being so immersed and overwhelmed, I think, with her passion for education that all I knew is I didn't want to be a teacher. That was the only thing I knew as a teenager. I'm never going to be a teacher, whatever I do. Because I didn't really have any other firm ideas. So I went and studied psychology, actually, at university, and then got dragged to Japan by my girlfriend at the time. And she wanted to go to Japan. I kind of followed along, and I didn't speak any Japanese. And the only work I could do there while we were living there was teaching English. So I begrudgingly took a job teaching English in Tokyo and instantly fell in love with it, probably for the same reasons that we all love education, And so I came back to Australia after a while, studied my teaching degree, and then ended up teaching psychology, high school psychology for a long time before I really stumbled on 2 things that have kind of informed my career. One is world-class pedagogy. I'm fascinated by what it is that the best teachers in the world do differently from mere mortals like me. And I wanted to really study that. And I wrote a book in 2011 that had the chance to interview USA Teacher of the Year, Australian Teacher of the Year, UK Teacher of the Year, and just try and ascertain what it is that the best teachers in the world do differently. So that's a real passion of mine. And the other is well-being. And being a sort of my training in psychology and my experience in education is that whereas Jared has this angle on learning science and he's such a fascinating kind of mind to understand the science of learning, my passion really is well-being science. What is it that really makes kids tick deep inside their humanity and their hearts and minds, and so well-being has become a real kind of angle. And so my work over the last 5 years has been the intersection really of education and well-being science, and that is positive education, which is about taking wellbeing science and placing it at the heart of education. So for the last 5 years, I've worked with schools and governments and non-government organisations around the world to help really embed wellbeing science into schools. So that's my story.
Nice. So we got a little bit of kind of both worlds in here today with the two of you. So
that's why I think we actually play so well together. Is my science of learning, his well-being science, but with the overlap at education. There's a lot of headbutting, there's a lot of arguments, but there's a lot of good kind of middle ground where you say, okay, how does all of this play together?
Yeah, it's like I teach my students. It's foil characters, right? You got the juxtaposition of the 2 different kinds. I'm not going to get into that, though. So, before we get into the real stuff, I always like to ask kind of fun questions. I got kind of a new one that I came up with that gets into a little bit of maybe some deeper psychological analysis and personality stuff. So I'm gonna pose 3 options to you, and I'd like to hear kind of what would you go with and kind of why. So going with my, if you ever played any kind of RPGs, there's really kind of like 3 classifications a lot of times. There's warrior, there's a mage, wizard, or a rogue assassin. So if you had to pick, what would you pick? Warrior, mage, or rogue?
I'll go. I think this is the hardest question I've ever been asked on an interview. I'm scared about how you're going to psychoanalyze this, and it's making me shake a little bit. No, I think I can't. I just got to go with my gut and say rogue. I like causing trouble a little bit. I like to flex the rules, and I like to have fun. I think maybe it's part of Australian culture is kind of the value around the cheekiness, kind of playfulness and cheekiness, and we have this concept of a tall poppy syndrome, it's called in Australia and in some other countries as well, where there's a real value held by people that are kind of at the ground level, grassroots level, kind of agitating and causing good trouble, kind of. Right, so I think that's how I'd like to think of myself, maybe as someone who causes good trouble. So rogue.
Okay, so I go with that too. It's funny because I'm going to get my initial instinct is rogue, but I do know that anytime I do play RPGs, I always pick a warrior. Why? Because there's something like when you play those. Remember, Mass Effect, where you get to choose either good or bad, and then you become really saintly, or you become a butthead.
Right.
I always go the saintly path, always. And so there's something about a warrior that's just noble and strong.
Yes.
It's I stand for one thing and I'm just going to do it. So as much as I want to be the rogue, I feel like I'm just going to try. I would select the warrior, which is funny because with well-being, I thought you'd be the warrior. I stand for goodness, and me is just kind the butthead. I'd be the rogue, but I think we swapped there.
Yeah, that's interesting. What about you, Lee? What are you?
I don't know. I guess my personality, I can never pick just one. I don't. It's just my thing. So I'm a combination of.
That's cheating.
Oh, okay, fine.
You can't. No, come on, you can't.
If I had to go,
I know it's your podcast, but I'm not going to let you get away with that.
Just one, I would have to go with a rogue. I'm all about the finesse kind of side of things. So, warriors tend to be kind of that head-on deal, and then mage is kind of in the back support almost a lot of times. So I flank, I'm going to sneak around and all that kind of stuff. So that's
put the knife in from the back and go
exactly. You never see it coming.
Who's a mage? We have no mages in our team. We need to get a mage.
Yeah.
Maybe my dog Ruby. If she comes in, I'll put her up on my lap so everyone can see her. She'll be the mage.
Mage is kind of like
she's magical.
My secondary thing, just that quest for knowledge kind of thing, is my whole thing. But
I didn't think about the quest for knowledge. That's a good. I was just thinking about magic wands.
See, I was kind of thinking Jared, you would go with mage just from the science kind of side of things, but no,
I'm still going to go warrior. Because if you watch Lord of the Rings, I want to be Aragorn.
Right.
Argyle?
Aragorn,
that's the one I want. But I love Gandalf. And then who would be the rogue in that kind of
the team? Hobbits.
Is there one?
The Hobbits would be rogues.
Oh, yeah, good call. Yeah, no, I want to be Aragorn.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right, well, we'll talk about some real stuff now, I guess.
I like this.
We have a side podcast episode where we just talk about fantasy stuff. I don't know. So, you two recently collaborated on a book together, 10 Things Schools Get Wrong and How We Can Get Them Right. And so a funny story, and Jared, I think you may have seen this when I posted this online. I don't know if you saw it, David. So I was reading the book, and I had just finished it, and I had it sitting on the side table next to the couch. And I came in one day, I had gotten up and gone to another room, and I came back and I found this little note that was sitting on top of the book, and I'm going to post this in the show notes. So my daughter, who is 6 years old, she saw the book and wrote a note that said, "School isn't wrong." And drew a little picture of herself with a sad face. so
it's amazing.
And I mean, she just like right now she's in kindergarten. She absolutely loves school, and so I when she read the title, 10 things schools get wrong, and she got mad. She was like, "School isn't wrong," and so
good. Hey, you're raising her right.
That's right.
Yeah. That is an awesome response to have.
Yeah, I hope that it stays that way too. But I know, like I posted it just kind of as a joke. But Jared, I think you responded and was like, "Yeah, she's right on. Like that's the whole point of our book is not that school is wrong. It's just we're maybe a little bit like misdirected on some of this, right?"
Yeah. And it's just that's what we always say. Like the book's the very first sentence is, education is not broken. Schools are nailing it. And we have been for decades. We're doing a really dang good job. And teachers every day, millions of them are nailing it. They're hitting it out of the park. What we're talking about is, whereas most people call for a revolution, right? Oh, the world is changing. School is outdated. We need a whole new, computers are here. Revolution. We're saying, no, you don't need to revolutionize anything. 85% of everything we do is fine. Now we just play with our expertise and we tweak. What are some small things that we can do to get that much better? And tomorrow get that much better. So this book isn't 10 big things. This is 10 just minor things that we can tweak to make our jobs that much better, so the next generation can push beyond where we've just pushed. So spot on. Education is definitely not broken, and your daughter, she's spot on.
So what I wanted to talk about today is actually the final chapter in the book, which is about kind of the narrative around school. So we're kind of talking about purpose, right? So just to kind of to start it out, to get some grounding with this, what is it when you're talking about narrative for something like education? What is it that we're actually talking about?
Yeah. Do you want me to tackle that, Dave, or do you want to jump in?
You go. No,
so a good way to think about a narrative is a narrative, and in this case, I'm talking about narrative with a capital N. So I'm not just talking about any old story. A narrative with a capital N becomes a worldview, is a system by which you organize the past, the present, the future, and the way you live in it. So in this case, you could assume a narrative needs 3 essential components. One, it has to organize how the world has gotten to this moment. So it has to take the past and build a very clear picture of how we've gotten to today with some projection into the future. Here's what might happen next. 2, it's got to establish clear societal norms and rules. So society is made out of different groups of individuals. A narrative has to clarify what those different groups are, why they exist, and kind of how they interact with one another. And 3, then it has to identify what it means to be an individual within this giant story. So what does it mean to live a moral life? What does it mean to be a good person? What is a good life? How is that defined? So you've got essentially, you can see a narrative covers pretty much everything. Who are you? What is society? And how did we get here? So that's why, like, a narrative with a capital N, good example is something like Catholicism. That's a very strong narrative on how did we get here? What are the groups that exist today, and how are you supposed to live a good life? Something like Marxism is a very powerful narrative. So when we're talking narrative with schools, we're saying, what is that powerful narrative that's driving school? Not what do we want from kids? I want kids to be creative. That's cool. That's not a narrative. Not I want kids to be self-agentic. Yeah, me too. But what is our narrative? What's the beginning, middle, end that we're building to help kids make sense of the world? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. So that kind of overarching, purpose. I guess that's the kind of key word in that chapter. So, looking at that and kind of thinking through that, I almost wonder, like, is that, when people say that education is outdated and the negative kind of stuff, is that, do you think that is what they might be referring to without knowing that they're referring to it? That kind of like the narrative of education is not working?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea if people were clear on what the narrative was. I think people are rebelling against something that hasn't been clarified yet. And so if you were to ask people, what is the narrative you're actually fighting against that you think is outdated, they probably couldn't put a finger on it. For as much as we think there's a function, most of us just don't take time to say, what is actually going on? What do you think, David? Sorry about that. I cut you off.
No, I like that. That's a great insight, Lee, because Jared and I firmly believe, as you've heard already, that the system's not broken. The system's working really well, largely. And we don't have an outdated system. We've got an old system that's worked well for thousands of years and continues to work really well. The system's not broken, but maybe that's really insightful to think maybe this is what this kind of agitation that we feel, that teachers feel that something's not quite right. And as Jared said, I think it's partly kind of this discomfort is not with the system itself, but maybe with the narrative, the why are we doing this? And I think you're both right. I think Jared's right as well, that we often don't, there's not enough time, or we don't take enough time, or we don't allocate enough time to ask the question of, wait, why are we doing this? So we're setting homework for 8-year-old kids. Okay, well, just hang on. Why are we doing this? And then we have high stakes testing for 17-year, 18-year-old kids. Okay, just hang on. Just tell me, why are we doing this? Like, what is the bigger purpose for all of this? And I think for me, I taught in the classroom for 15 years, and I had to get out at the end because that was causing me so much kind of discomfort and kind of a sense of concussion that I was called a good teacher because my kids got good grades, but that didn't feel like why I was trying to do the job. And there's this awful kind of dissonance, right? And I think maybe you're right that this kind of outdated thing we call outdated education might be this kind of sense that the why isn't matching our why.
Yeah.
And that's actually, as you're talking, I think you're actually spot on, is we feel this discomfort, right? Something can change. But we can't put our finger on it, and maybe you're absolutely right, Lee. And I actually think you are. It's the narrative. I think the narrative we use is so out of sync with what people want, but without being able to clarify that narrative, most people, until you point out, here's the narrative you've been working under, as soon as they see it, they go, oh yeah, that's what I'm mad at. But until they can put a word to it, what do? They try and change structure. Right. They say something doesn't feel right. Let's go online. Something doesn't feel right. Let's change form. And so they're trying to tackle, and this is going to sound kind of weird, but almost an existential crisis by tackling the tools. Yeah. Like, well, what if I just paint my room a different color? Well, no, that's not going to change and so maybe we're just doing what we can because most people don't recognize the big issue is one of narrative. Right. If we just change the narrative, we might see that all the tools are fine. We just need to play under a different heading.
Okay, so I guess that kind of brings me to kind of the next idea, next question, which is, what is the problem with the current narrative? Which, I mean, I think y'all kind of mentioned it, is that there is no current narrative, and so
I'd
what is?
I'd push back. I think there is a narrative. It's just most teachers wouldn't have selected it. Okay, so if you kind of pull back, what you see is the narrative that's driving most schools. And so it wouldn't be like, I think military schools, totally different. Art schools, totally different. Religious schools, totally different. So, but more general public private schools that just work in the state system, the narrative is one of what we'll call the economic consumer. Right. The idea that everything is predicated on economics. Your wealth or your self-worth is tied up in your wealth, the goods you own, and so go into the capital N narrative. Does this explain the world? Yes. History is now divided into time periods of growth and development. We have the Industrial Revolution. Before that, we had Farming Revolution, all these things. And what we're doing is we're showing how that built the economies up. Today is then society is now predicated on different levels, classes of society. You have to learn where you fit in and how those societies all fit together. And then a personal life is meaningful so that at school, you're here to get the right skills to get the highest paying job. So really there is a narrative, but until you see it pointed out to you, most people wouldn't recognize that as being the driving narrative. And it's only when you actually see it that you go, oh yeah, most of our decisions are predicated on this economic consumer concept, which now we can ask, is that really what teachers want? And I don't know that is.
Right, because then that becomes the, when you paint it in that light, that makes sense why I think we have so many problems with, like students always want to know, well, why do we need to know this? Because it comes back to essentially it's not why do we need to know this? The question really is, how is this going to make me money? Right?
Yes.
Because this is going to give you a better job. If you know this, you're going to be a lawyer instead of a bricklayer, as though one is better than the other.
So it's also how we tend to judge the success of an educator, right? That we kind of, this dominant way of judging success of an educator is, how many of my students got an A grade? How many of my students got 100 out of 100? And I'm a good teacher if there's lots of A grades, because then my students get into Harvard, and then they'll get into law school, and then they'll become a lawyer, and therefore they're successful. And they've won at life because they've got lots of money and a good job. And I've won as a teacher because I got them into Harvard. And this is the kind of dominant economic consumerist narrative that we do because we're part of the system or whatever. We have to and this is where this kind of conflict exists, because we go through it. Even good teachers play the game because they think they have to, but it's not why they chose the profession in the first place, and it's not what the students want either, and it's not what the parents want. Is the irony? Like, no one wants this kind of intuitively, but we kind of play the game because it's there.
Yeah. So if we've kind of like identified that as the problem, I guess the natural question is, how do we change that? And one of the question that I really was kind of wrestling with, especially reading that last chapter, is, is it possible to really solidify a narrative, a better alternative narrative? Just say we came up with one that would be better than this economic consumerism kind of thing. Could we solidify that across like an entire nation? And what I think of is, we've got such a wide range of career options, of student interests, of different parts of a country have different kind of cultures embedded in them. So is it possible to find one that works across the board like that? And then, how do we do that?
Yeah. Ooh, David, take it. I love this question. Yeah. By the way, of all the podcasts we've been on, you've just nailed better questions than. Nothing against any other podcast. It's just these are the questions you've asked have got us thinking. Like, crap. Oh boy, do we got to go back to the drawing board? But I'd love to hear what you're thinking, Dave, like how you're kind of landing with it.
Yeah, and Jared and I haven't kind of rehearsed this in any way. We've not had this exact conversation before, Lee. So this is kind of us thinking out loud, and so I love it. My instinctive response, it's such a great question. My instinctive response is actually, respectfully, I think it's the wrong question. I think you're thinking at a systemic level. You're looking at the system, the systemic narrative, and saying we need to change it up there. My kind of instinctive response, and I don't know if it's right, but my instinct is, I know the magic that occurs when I have a child in my class that feels inspired to want to go and make the world a better place. Right. I think teachers have immense power on the ground. Like each time I turn up to a class with 20 minds, 20 brains there, that the ripples that go out from that experience of me being in the classroom can be profound. Often they're not, because we're going through the mundanity of schooling and grading and testing, blah, blah, blah. But there are certainly experiences in my life as a student and as a teacher where I know that what happened in that magic moment in the classroom is going to make the world a kind of better place going forward. So I think we have to tolerate your question and my perspective. Like the paradox here is that we're talking about systemic change or cultural change or narrative shifts. They're big level, high level stuff. But the paradox is that we are the system. Okay. So each time I turn up to my lesson with that one little 8th grade kid called Jane or Muhammad or Peter or whoever that is, we are the system. And the teacher has immense power in that microcosmic kind of moment to affect change. And you multiply that by me with 20 kids times 4 classes, 100 kids times 20, 30 years of my career, and there's thousands of kids. And then they go into the world. So I think this is where the teacher, we must recognize that teachers are empowered to make significant cultural change at the grassroots level. And this is where I think we need to fight the battle at a systemic level, but also be willing to encourage the teachers to grab the immense power they have in those individual micro moments and to take responsibility for doing what they think's right to make themselves proud.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think I'm riffing off the back. Can I just riff real quick off that?
Yeah.
Thinking, and again, we this is just us talking. So now you're getting a sense of how we wrote a book. All we do is sit here and just jibber jabber till an idea pops out. So I agree. So how do you change a cultural narrative? So the reason why the economic consumer narrative is so powerful in schools is because that's the cultural narrative. We're all living it, and so it bleeds into schools. How do you change a cultural narrative? It will never happen top down. It simply can't, because there's no one driving the machine. If you think about society like a train, there is no conductor. It's just an emergent property of all of our individual actions. So the big narrative of culture will change at a grassroots level. It changes when one kid one day decides, screw it, I'm going to skip class, I'm going to go march for the environment. And the next day, another kid decides, screw it, I'm going to not do this, I'm going to go march for the environment. Eventually, all these environmental things step up, and now the narrative starts to shift into a more environmental friendly narrative. Gotcha. It was never done to us, it was done by us. So that's what I'm starting to think is could you ever get a systematized narrative across an entire nation? Ideally, yes. But it would never happen. It's got to happen day to day, and then that narrative is going to reflect current culture. And I do believe, I believe the next narrative is going to be a more holistic, almost nature-based, where history becomes how has man interacted with nature and what impact has that had? How does society today interact with nature? What impact is that having? What does it mean to be a good person? I think the narrative will switch. I think we're kind of watching it happening, but that's will everyone agree on it? That's where you get that sticky bit of, no, there's always going to be some people who are pissed at some level. There always were. I mean, go back to the very first school system in the U.S., and they were very clear on what public schooling is. We are here to make a U.S. citizen. The entire purpose of public schooling is to make U.S. people. And U.S. was a melting pot, and so they embraced that. So it wasn't a unicultural thing. It was very much a multicultural thing, but it was said, the U.S. is predicated on these values, these rules. This is what we want to make sure students leave with. And so that's kind of what, can we come up with an identity that embraces multiculturalism but still says it's okay to say, I am an Australian. It is okay to say public schooling is meant to make a British student or a South African student. And if you're not willing to embrace your culture or your world, and that's where the U.S. is struggling right now, I don't think they're okay with accepting that there is one U.S. citizen that we can all be a part of, that there's got to be different ones. Then it might, if you can't get a unified identity, it becomes really hard to find a unified narrative that would then drive school.
So real quick, I know we're short on time to finish up here, so to kind of wrap it up then, would you say then, because actually kind of my next question was maybe like the struggle of the daily classroom teacher, but it almost sounds like that's more of the answer. So would it be almost more beneficial? So like for me as just a teacher in my classroom working with 120, 130 students every day, developing a narrative that works in my classroom and then shifting that, maybe then it extends to other classrooms in the school and the school as a whole. That seems to be kind of like what I'm hearing a lot.
And you never know. I think you're spot on. Is rather than waiting for a narrative, each teacher makes his or her own very specific narrative. So mine in my classroom when I teach is, and we talked about it shortly in the book, is I call it the giant slayers, where our entire purpose as human beings is to take what the past has done, learn it incredibly well, and then break the living hell out of it. And your job as my students then is to, by the end of class, by the end of our period, our semester together, you need to call bullshit on me. You need to show me where I have been wrong, how I'm wrong, and you need to push me back. Now, the joke is I ain't going to go easy. So you can't come at me with nothing. You've got to come at me with a deep understanding of what I'm saying and then show me why it's wrong. And that narrative is every field in the world can be understood historically as ideas that were developed and broken to get up to now. Society can be understood as interacting human beings where we have to understand each other's things first and then help each other push to whatever the next level is. And then personally, a good life is one lived by both respecting the past and then understanding that my job is now to move beyond where my ancestors have taken me. And that is my narrative I use in my class. And just as you said, my dream was that if I use this narrative, someone else will take it, it will spread. But unfortunately, I was teaching at university, and what happened is they just asked me to stop teaching. So, you never quite know how deep it's going to go. But that was, as far as I could tell, that was the only way I was going to make a difference, was to, in my class, say, no, we're going to do things a little bit differently here. Dave, do you see something?
And I'd love to answer you. I love that, Jared, and I love your question, Lee. I love that you stumbled on your own question. You thought, the struggle, I think was the word used, the struggle of the everyday teacher. But actually, it's the power that everyday teacher. It's not a struggle. We choose this because it's a beautiful profession where, teachers in education, we don't make things. We don't make widgets. We don't make cars. What we do is we make decisions. And we literally make minds. Like, that's what we make as educators. We make decisions, we make minds, and therefore we make culture. Culture is made in schools, not solely, but a lot of what culture is, because we're literally shaping the minds of the next generation. There is no more power that a human can have than that. And that's where, we're so grateful for the work that educators are doing. We so value what they're doing, and we want them to feel brave, feel courageous to make a decision on, what's going to make me proud, is the kind of the final sentence in this chapter. Make sure your narrative makes you proud. When you turn up to school tomorrow, the next day, next year, or on your deathbed, when you look back at your career, am I proud of the narrative that I had? Because you are literally shaping the next generation every single day you turn up to your profession. That's why it is the most important, most beautiful profession on the planet, we think so.
Yeah. I do too. Well, David, Jared, thanks so much. This is a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I really appreciate you.
You nailed it, dude. You did. That's good. You got us thinking. When you get us going, you've done a really good job.
All right. Well, it's been fun. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Good on you. Thank you.
So for this week's question of the week, I'm really curious to see what kind of responses you guys have. I would like to know, what is your narrative for education? What is your purpose in your classroom? I think it's pretty safe to say that none of us got into what we got into for test scores. I think that would be a fair guess to why most of us got into education, or not why we got into education. So what is the purpose? What do you want students to, walk away from your class taking with them? This is definitely something that I've been thinking about since I talked to David and Jared, and something that I really want to work on developing before next year, so that I can have a very clear kind of purpose and direction in what I do in class. And I don't know, right now, my thought and the things that I really want to put into kind of my classroom is some kind of sense of unity and understanding and compassion. This idea that, we're all kind of one, and we all should not be tearing each other down. So I'm kind of thinking through that and figuring out what that's going to be. But I'd love to hear some of your other ideas out there as well. If you got a response, you can tag me on Twitter at Comic Socks, and you can use the hashtag 8BitCrew. Well, that will just about wrap up this episode. Hey, thanks so much to Jared and David for being on this week. I loved talking to those guys, and definitely would love to have them back on sometime later to talk about more of the research that they're doing. Make sure to check them out online. Jared is on Twitter at JC Horvath. He's got a YouTube channel that I'll link to, and then you can also visit lmeglobal.net to find out what he's working on. David David is also on Twitter at David Bott. And definitely make sure, if you haven't already, check out their book, 10 Things Schools Get Wrong and How We Can Get Them Right. Thanks so much for listening this week. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm on Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, you name it, I'm there. Share the podcast with other folks. Make sure we're building up this community and joining together as educators, working on building on what we've already got. Of course, if you want to share with the community as well, I'd love to have you on sometime if you are doing something interesting, trying something new, or something that you think other educators should hear about. Get a hold of me and let me know, and we'll set up some time to get that done. Well, stay safe. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the work that you're doing. Keep getting out there, giving it your best. Keep leveling up that teaching craft. And until next week, may your swords stay sharp and your shields hold strong. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and check out the 8-Bit Instructor YouTube channel for EdTech tips and tutorials, as well as other content on my website, 8bitinstructor.com. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at ComicSocks and use the hashtag 8BitCrew. See you next week.